Out from the heart. James Allen. Foreword. Confucius said, "Self-improvement is the fundamental basis of all progress, and of all moral development." A maxim, as deep and comprehensive as it is simple, practical and simple, for there is no surer path to knowledge, nor a better way to help the world, than by perfecting oneself. Nor is there any nobler work or higher science than that of self-perfection. He who seeks impeccability, who longs for a pure heart, and who aspires to a calm, wise and insightful mind, embarks on the most sublime mission that any human being can undertake in his life. The fruits of this journey are reflected in an ordered, blessed and beautiful life. Chapter 1. The Heart and Life. As is the heart, so is life. The inside becomes the outside without ceasing, and nothing remains hidden. What is hidden is only for a time, then it matures, and finally comes out. Seed, tree, flower and fruit are the fourfold order of the universe. It is from the state of a man's heart that the conditions of his life proceed. His thoughts blossom into acts, and his acts bear the fruit of character and destiny. Life unfolds always from within, and reveals itself to the light, then the thoughts engendered in the heart, are finally revealed in words, deeds and things done. Like the fountain of the hidden spring, so flows the life of a man, from the secret recesses of his heart. All that he is and does, is generated there, and all that he will be and do, will spring from there. Sorrow and happiness, suffering and joy, fear and hope, hate and love, ignorance and enlightenment, are nowhere, but in the heart. They are only mental conditions. Man is the guardian of his heart, the watchman of his mind, the solitary guardian of his citadel of life. As such, he may be diligent or negligent, and he may guard his heart with more or less care. He may guard and purify his mind with more earnestness, and he may guard against the appearance of unrighteous thoughts. This is the path to enlightenment and bliss. On the other hand, he may live freely and carelessly, neglecting the supreme task of rightly ordering his life. This is the way of self-deception and suffering. Let man understand that life in its totality proceeds from the mind, and behold, the way of bliss is open to him. For then he will discover that he possesses the power to govern his mind, and mold it according to his ideal. He will then choose to walk steadfastly, along the paths of thought and action, which are altogether excellent. For him, life will become beautiful and sacred, and sooner or later, he will be detached from all evil, confusion and suffering. For it is impossible for a man not to attain liberation, enlightenment and peace, if he guards with untiring diligence, the door of his heart. Chapter 2. The Nature and Power of the Mind. The mind is the arbiter of life. It is the creator and shaper of conditions, and the recipient of its own results. It contains within itself both the power to create illusions and to perceive reality. The mind is the infallible weaver of destiny. Thought is the thread, good and bad actions are the foundation, or the woof and weft, while the web, woven on the loom of life, is the character. The mind is clothed in garments of its own creation. Man, as a mental being, possesses all the powers of mind, and is endowed with unlimited options. He learns by experience, and can accelerate or retard his experience. He is not arbitrarily bound at any point, but has bound himself at many points. And having bound himself he can, when he chooses, free himself. It can become bestial or pure, ignorant or noble, foolish or wise, as you wish. It is capable, by recurrent practice, of forming habits, just as it can, by renewed effort, break those habits. You can surround yourself with illusions, until you completely lose the truth, and you can destroy every one of those illusions, until you completely regain the truth. Its possibilities are infinite, its freedom is complete. The nature of mind is to create its own conditions, and to choose the states in which it will dwell. It also has the power to alter any condition, and to abandon any state. This it does continually, as it acquires knowledge of one state after another, by repeated choice, and exhaustive experience. The inner processes of thought form the sum of character and life. Man can modify and alter these processes, by exerting upon them will and effort. The bonds of habit, impotence and sin, are self-created, and can only be destroyed by that very person. They exist nowhere but in one's own mind, and although they are directly related to external things, they have no real existence in those things. The external is shaped and animated by the internal, and never the internal by the external. Temptation does not arise in the external object, but in the lust of the mind for that object. Sorrow and suffering neither belong by nature to the external things and events of life, but to an undisciplined attitude of the mind towards those things and events. The mind that is disciplined by purity, and fortified by wisdom, avoids all those lusts and desires, which are inseparably linked to grief. Thus he arrives at enlightenment and peace. To condemn others as evil, and to curse external conditions as the source of evil, increases rather than diminishes the suffering and discomfort of the world. The outer is but the shadow and effect of the inner, and when the heart is pure, all the outer is pure. All growth and life comes from within outward, all decay and death comes from without inward. This is the universal law. All evolution comes from within, and all adjustment must take place within. He who ceases to fight against others, and employs his powers in the transformation, regeneration and development of his own mind, preserves his energies, and preserves himself. And as he succeeds in harmonizing his own mind, he leads others, through consideration and charity, to an equally blessed state. The path of enlightenment and peace is not obtained by assuming authority and guidance over other minds, but by exercising legitimate authority over one's own mind, and by guiding oneself along paths of firm and lofty virtue. A man's life comes from his heart and mind. He has composed that mind, with his own thoughts and actions. It is in his hand to reshape that mind, by choosing his thoughts. In this way he can transform his life. Chapter 3. Habit Formation. Every established mental condition is an acquired habit, and has become such by continuous repetition of thought. Despondency and joy, anger and calmness, greed and generosity, in short, all mental states, are habits acquired by choice, until they have become automatic. A constantly repeated thought becomes in the end a fixed habit of mind, and from such habits proceeds one's life. It is in the nature of the mind to acquire knowledge by the repetition of its experiences. A thought, which at first is very difficult to retain, and on which it is difficult to dwell, in the end becomes a natural and habitual practice, by being constantly retained in the mind. A child, when he begins to learn a trade, cannot even handle his tools well, much less use them correctly. But after long repetition and practice, he handles them with perfect ease, and great skill. Likewise, a state of mind, which at first seems unattainable, through persistence and practice, ends up being acquired and ingrained in the character, as a natural and spontaneous condition. In this power of the mind, to form and reform its habits, its conditions, is contained the basis of man's salvation. It is the open door to perfect freedom, by self-mastery. For just as a man has the power to form harmful habits, so he has the same power to create habits, which are essentially good. And here we come to a point, which needs some elucidation, and which calls for deep and serious reflection, on the part of my reader. It is commonly said, that it is easier to do evil than to do good, to sin than to be holy. Such a condition has come to be regarded, almost universally, as a self-evident truth. No less a teacher than Buddha has said, evil deeds, and deeds injurious to ourselves, are easy to do, that which is beneficial and good, that is very difficult to do. And with regard to mankind in general, this is true, but it is only true as a passing experience, as a fleeting factor in human evolution. It is not a fixed condition of things, nor is it the nature of an eternal truth. It is easier that men do evil than good, because of the prevalence of ignorance. Because it is not understood, neither the true nature of things, nor the essence and meaning of life. During the process of learning to write, it is surprisingly easy for a child to hold the pencil incorrectly, and form the letters defectively. However, it is challenging and requires great effort to hold the pencil properly and write correctly. This is due to the child's ignorance of the art of writing, which can only be dispelled by persistent effort and practice. Until at last, it becomes natural and easy to hold the pen correctly, and difficult, as well as wholly unnecessary, to do the wrong thing. The same is true with the vital things of the mind and of life. To think and act correctly requires much practice and renewed effort. The time comes when thinking and acting in the right way becomes habitual and simple, while doing the wrong thing becomes unnecessary and complicated. Just as a craftsman becomes, by practice, accomplished in his craft, so you can become, also by practice, accomplished in goodness. It is entirely a matter of forming new habits of thought. And he for whom right thoughts have become easy and natural, and wrong thoughts and wrong acts, difficult to do, has attained to the highest virtue, pure spiritual knowledge. It is easy and natural for men to sin, because they have formed, by incessant repetition, harmful, unenlightened habits of thought. It is most challenging for the thief to resist the temptation to steal, when the opportunity presents itself, because he has spent so much time, holding thoughts of greed and avarice. But such a difficulty does not exist for the honest man, who has lived so long with the kind of thoughts, which are upright and honest. He has become so enlightened as to the wrong, foolishness, and unfruitfulness of theft, that not even the remotest idea of stealing is able to enter his mind. The sin of stealing is very extreme, and I have introduced it, to illustrate more clearly, the force and formation of the habit. But all sins and virtues are formed in the same way. Anger and impatience are natural and easy for thousands of people, because they constantly repeat thoughts and acts of anger and impatience. And with each repetition, the habit is more firmly established, and more deeply rooted. Calmness and patience can become habitual in the same way, by first grasping, through effort, a calm and patient thought. And then by continually thinking it, and living in it, until the use, it becomes second nature, and anger and impatience disappear forever. It is in this way, that every wrong thought can be expelled from the mind. Just as every false act can be destroyed, so every sin can be overcome. Chapter 4. Doing and Knowing. Let man realize that his life, in its totality, proceeds from his mind. By becoming aware that the mind is a combination of habits, the individual realizes that he can, by patient devotion, modify them to any degree, and thus exercise complete mastery and control over them. Instantly, he will have obtained possession of the key, which will unlock the door of his complete emancipation. But deliverance from the evils of life, which are the evils of the mind, is a matter of constant growth from within, and not a sudden acquisition from without. At every hour and in every day, it is necessary to train the mind, so that it generates unshakable thoughts, and adopts correct and imperturbable attitudes, in those situations, where it tends to fall into error and passion. Like the patient sculptor on his marble, the aspirant to the right life must gradually work on the raw material of his mind. He must do so until he has forged from it, the ideal of his holiest dreams. In working toward so supreme an attainment, it is necessary to begin with the lowest and easiest steps, and to proceed by natural and progressive stages, toward the highest and most difficult. This law of growth, progress, evolution and unfoldment, by gradual and ever-ascending stages, is absolute in all departments of life, and in all human achievements. If it is not taken into account, failure will be total. In the acquisition of education, in the learning of a trade, or in the growth of a business, this law is fully recognized, and minutely obeyed by all. But in the acquisition of virtue, in the learning of truth, and in the pursuit of right conduct and the knowledge of life, it is not recognized, and is disobeyed by almost all. Hence virtue, truth and the perfect life, remain unpracticed, unacquired, and remain unknown. It is often mistaken to believe that the higher life is reduced to reading and adopting theological or metaphysical hypotheses, and that spiritual principles can be understood through this method. The higher life implies to live in an elevated way in thought, word and action. And the knowledge of these spiritual principles, inherent to the human being and to the universe, can only be obtained, after a long process of discipline, in the search and practice of virtue. The lesser must be fully grasped and understood, always before the greater can be known. Practice always precedes true knowledge. The schoolmaster never attempts to teach his pupils the abstract principles of mathematics from the beginning. He knows that such a method of teaching would be futile, and learning impossible. He first puts before them a simple sum, and after explaining it to them, he lets them do it. After repeated failures and ever-renewed efforts, they get it right, and then a more difficult task is set before them, and then another, and so on and so forth. It is only after the students have diligently mastered all the arithmetic lessons over many years that the teacher ventures to reveal to them the underlying mathematical principles. In learning a trade, for example that of a mechanic, you are not taught at first the principles of mechanics. First you put a simple tool in his hand, and explain to him how to use it correctly. Then he is left to do it, with effort and practice. As he succeeds in handling his tools correctly, he is given increasingly difficult tasks. Until, after several years of successful practice, he is ready to study and understand the principles of mechanics. In a well-governed home, the child is taught first to be obedient, and to behave correctly, in all circumstances. It is not even explained to him why he should do so, but is ordered to do so. Only after he has succeeded in doing that which is right and proper, is he told why he should do it. No parent would attempt to teach his child the principles of ethics, before requiring him to practice family duty and social virtue. Thus practice always precedes knowledge, even in the ordinary things of the world, and in the spiritual, in the existence of the higher life, this law is rigid in its demands. Virtue can only be known by doing, and knowledge of truth can only be attained by perfecting oneself in the practice of virtue. To be complete in the practice and acquisition of virtue is to be complete in the knowledge of truth. Truth can only be reached by practicing daily and hourly the lessons of virtue, beginning with the simplest, and passing on to the most difficult. A child learns his lessons patiently and obediently at school, practicing constantly, and always striving, until he overcomes all failures and difficulties. In like manner, the child of truth, undaunted by failure, and strengthened by difficulties, applies himself to do right, in thought and action. As he succeeds in acquiring virtue, his mind unfolds in the knowledge of truth, and it is a knowledge in which he can safely rest. Chapter 5. First Steps in the Higher Life. Since the path of virtue is the path of knowledge, it is necessary to attain perfection in the most modest steps before one can comprehend the principles of truth. How, then, shall a disciple of truth begin, and how shall he who longs to rectify his mind and purify his heart, that heart which is the source and storehouse of all the affairs of life, assimilate the lessons of virtue? How does one thus build up the strength of knowledge, destroying ignorance and the evils of life? What are the first lessons and the first steps? How are they to be learned? How are they to be practiced? How are they to be mastered and understood? The first lessons consist of overcoming the wrong mental limitations, which are easier to eradicate, and are common obstacles to spiritual growth. They also involve practicing simple virtues, in the domestic and social sphere. I will help the reader better if I group and classify the first 10 steps of the vices of the body to overcome and eradicate, in these 3 lessons. First lesson, discipline of the body. First step, idleness, laziness or indolence. Second step, self-indulgence or gluttony. Second lesson, discipline of the word. Third step, slander. Fourth step, gossip and idle talk. Fifth step, abusive and cruel discourse. Sixth step, frivolity or irreverent language. Seventh step, critical, captious or blaming speech. Third lesson, discipline of tendencies. Eighth step, disinterested fulfillment of duty. Ninth step, unwavering uprightness or moral integrity. 10th step, unlimited forgiveness. The 2 vices of the body and the 5 vices of the tongue are so called because they manifest themselves in the body and in the tongue. Moreover, by classifying them so definitively, the reader's mind will be better aided. But it should be clearly understood that these vices arise mainly in the mind, and are erroneous conditions of the heart, which manifest themselves in the body and tongue. The presence of such chaotic states reveals that the mind is completely unenlightened as to the true meaning and purpose of life. The elimination of these states marks the beginning of a virtuous life, solid and full of light. But how to overcome and eradicate these vices? First of all, and immediately, by checking and controlling their external manifestations, and suppressing the wrong act. This will stimulate the mind to vigilance and reflection. Until, by repeated practice, he comes to perceive and understand the obscure, wrong and erroneous conditions of the mind, from which such acts arise. Then he will abandon them completely. It will be seen that the first step in the discipline of the mind is the overcoming of indolence or laziness. This is the easiest step, and until it is perfectly accomplished, the other steps cannot be taken. The clinging to indolence constitutes a complete barrier to the path of truth. Indolence manifests itself by giving the body an excess of rest and sleep, by postponing tasks, and by evading and neglecting those responsibilities which require immediate attention. To overcome this condition of laziness, it is necessary to awaken the body early, giving it the sleep necessary for a full recovery. As well as to perform promptly and energetically every task and duty, no matter how small, and as soon as they arise. In no case, you should eat or drink in bed. Nor should one remain in bed, after waking up, indulging in relaxation and reverie. This is a fatal habit, for the promptness and resolution of character, and for the purity of mind. No attempt should be made to think at such hours. Strong, pure, and true thought is impossible under such circumstances. A man should go to bed to sleep, and not to think. He should get up to think and work, and not to sleep. The next step is the overcoming of self-indulgence or gluttony. The glutton is he who eats only for animal gratification, without considering the real end and object of eating. He gobbles more than his body requires, and is greedy for sweet things and rich dishes. To overcome this undisciplined desire, it is necessary to reduce the amount of food consumed, and the number of daily meals, opting for a simple and uncomplicated diet. Regular mealtimes should be fixed, and should be rigidly avoided, eating at other times. Suppers should be abolished, as they are wholly unnecessary, on account of their promoting heavy sleep and cloudiness of mind. The application of such a method of discipline will quickly bring under control the appetite, which was formerly ungovernable. And as the sensual sin of self-indulgence is removed from the mind, the right selection of food will instinctively and unfailingly adapt itself to the purified mental condition. It should be well borne in mind, that what is necessary is a change of heart, and that any change of diet, which does not promote this end, is a useless thing. When one eats for enjoyment, he is a glutton. The heart must be purified from sensual craving, and from gustatory lust. When the body is well controlled, and firmly guided, when all tasks and duties are vigorously performed, without delay, when early awakening becomes a delight. When frugality, simplicity, temperance and abstinence are solidly established. And when one is content with the food that is served, however meager and simple it may be, and one puts an end to the desire for gustatory pleasure, then one has reached the first 2 steps on the way to a higher life. It is now that the first great lesson of truth is learned. Thus the foundation of a balanced, self-governing and virtuous life is laid in the heart. The next lesson is that of virtuous speech, in which there are 5 orderly steps. The first of these is to overcome the habit of slanderous speech. Slander consists in inventing or repeating unpleasant and evil reports about other people, as well as in exposing and magnifying the faults of others, or absent friends, and in introducing unworthy insinuations. In every slanderous act, enter the elements of thoughtlessness, cruelty, insincerity and falsehood. He who aspires to live a right life, will begin to control the cruel word of slander, before it has left his lips. Then he will check and eliminate the insincere thought that originated it. He will see to it that he does not vilify or defame anyone. He will refrain from belittling, defaming and condemning the absent friend, whose face he has so recently smiled or kissed, or whose hand he has shaken. He will not say of another, that which he dare not say to his face. And thus, coming at last to think sacredly of the character and reputation of others, he will destroy those bad mental conditions, which give rise to slander. The next step is the overcoming of gossip and idle talk. Idle talk consists of talking about the private affairs of others, talking simply to pass the time, and engaging in meaningless and irrelevant conversations. This uncontrolled talking is the result of a poorly controlled mind. The man of virtue will bridle his tongue, and thus learn to govern the mind correctly. He will not let his tongue run idly and foolishly, but will make his speech strong and pure, and speak with a purpose, or remain silent. The next vice to be overcome is that of injurious and unkind words. The man who abuses and accuses others has strayed from the right path. To hurl harsh words and insults at others is to sink deep into madness. When a man feels inclined to insult, curse and condemn others, let him hold his tongue, and look within himself. The virtuous man abstains from all abusive language, as well as from all quarreling. He employs only useful, necessary, pure and true words. The 6th step is the overcoming of levity, or irreverent speech. Light and frivolous conversation, the repetition of coarse jokes, and the telling of vulgar stories, which have no other purpose than to provoke empty laughter. The use of offensive expressions, and the use of disrespectful language, when addressing others or talking about them. Especially in the case of older people, or those who occupy positions of teachers, guardians or superiors. All this will be eliminated by the lover of virtue and truth. On the altar of irreverence, absent friends and companions are immolated, for the passing excitement of a momentary laugh, and all the sanctity of life is sacrificed to the eagerness to make a fool of oneself. When respect for others, and reverence where it is due, virtue is abandoned. When modesty, self-importance and dignity are eliminated from speech and behavior, truth is lost. In fact, even its doorway is hidden and forgotten. Irreverence is degrading even in the young, but when it accompanies gray hair, and appears in the behavior of the preacher, it is indeed a pitiful spectacle. And when this can be imitated and followed, then the blind lead the blind, then the elders, the preachers and the people, have lost their way. The virtuous will speak with earnestness and reverence. He will think and speak of the absent, as he thinks and speaks of the dead, tenderly and sacredly. He will abandon thoughtlessness, and will be careful not to sacrifice his dignity to satisfy a passing impulse of frivolity and superficiality. His humor will be pure and innocent, his voice will be subdued and musical, and his soul will be filled with grace and sweetness, as he manages to conduct himself as befits a man of truth. The last step of the second lesson is the overcoming of criticism, or blaming speech. This vice of the tongue consists in magnifying and insisting on small or apparent faults, as well as in silly discussions, and in following vain arguments, based on assumptions, beliefs and unfounded opinions. Life is short and real, and sin, sorrow and pain, are not remedied by quarrels. He who constantly seeks opportunities to contradict and refute the words of others, has not yet reached the highest path of holiness, the true life of self-surrender. The man who is always on the alert, to check his own words, in order to soften and purify them, will find the higher path, and the truer life. He will conserve his energies, maintain the composure of his mind, and preserve in himself the spirit of truth. When the tongue is well controlled and wisely subdued, when selfish impulses, and unworthy thoughts no longer rush to the tongue, demanding to be uttered. When speech has become harmless, pure, gentle, kind and resolute, and no word is uttered except with sincerity and honesty. Then, the 5 steps to virtuous speech having been accomplished, the second great lesson of truth has been learned and mastered. And now some will ask, but why all this discipline of the body and restraint of the tongue? Surely the higher life can be realized and known, without such strenuous labor, such ceaseless effort and vigilance. No, it is not possible. In the spiritual as in the material, nothing is done without labor, and the higher cannot be known, if the lower has not been realized. Can a man make a table, before he has learned to handle a tool, and drive a nail? And can a man fashion his mind, according to truth, before he has overcome the bondage of his body? Just as the intricate subtleties of language cannot be understood and managed, before mastering the alphabet, and the simplest words, so neither can the deep subtleties of the mind be understood and purified, before the ABC of right conduct is perfectly acquired. As to work, does not the young man, with joy and patience, undergo an apprenticeship of 7 years to master a trade? And does he not, day after day, carefully and faithfully comply with every detail of his master's instructions, waiting for the time when, perfected through obedience and practice, he will himself be a master? Where is the one who seeks excellence in music, painting, literature or other areas, but does not give himself completely to acquire that perfection, throughout his life? Is the work to be considered, then, the work that is about the highest excellence, the excellence of truth? He who says, the way you have pointed out is too difficult, I must have truth without labor, and salvation without effort. Such a man will not find the way out of the confusions and sufferings of selfishness. He will not find the mind tranquil and well strengthened, nor the life wisely ordered. His love is for ease and enjoyment, and not for truth. He who, with sincere love for truth within himself, longs to know it, will not look upon any task as too great to be undertaken, but will embrace it with exultation, and pursue it with patience. By perseverance in practice, he will come to the knowledge of truth. By fully understanding that all these outer difficulties are but reflections of the inner imbalances of the heart, the importance of developing discipline, both physical and verbal, will be further emphasized. An indolent body means an indolent mind, a poorly regulated tongue reveals a poorly regulated mind. And the process of remedying the manifest condition is really a method of rectifying the internal state. Moreover, the overcoming of these conditions is only a small part of what the process actually involves. The cessation of evil leads to the practice of good, and is inseparably related to it. As a man overcomes laziness and self-indulgence, he is actually cultivating and developing the virtues of abstinence, temperance, punctuality and self-denial. He acquires the strength, energy and determination indispensable for the successful accomplishment of the highest tasks. While overcoming the vices of speech, he develops the virtues of truthfulness, sincerity, reverence, kindness and self-control. He acquires the mental stability and firmness of purpose, without which the finer subtleties of the mind cannot be regulated, and the higher stages of conduct and enlightenment cannot be attained. Moreover, as he has to do the right thing, his knowledge deepens, and his insight intensifies. Just as a child's heart rejoices when he masters a schoolwork, so with every victory achieved, the man of virtue experiences a joy, which the seeker of pleasure and excitement can never know. And now, we come to the third lesson of the higher life, which consists in practicing and mastering, in daily life, three great fundamental virtues. 1. Selfless fulfillment of duty. 2. Unwavering righteousness, moral integrity. 3. Unlimited forgiveness. Having worked at overcoming the more superficial and chaotic conditions mentioned in the first lessons, the fighter for virtue and truth has already prepared his mind. He is now ready to take on greater and more challenging challenges, and to control and purify the deeper motives of his heart. Without the right performance of duty, the higher virtues cannot be known, and truth cannot be apprehended. Generally, duty is regarded as an irksome work, something obligatory, to be endured or somehow avoided. This way of regarding duty proceeds from a selfish condition of mind, and from an erroneous understanding of life. All duty should be considered sacred, and its faithful and disinterested fulfillment, one of the main rules of conduct. All personal and selfish considerations should be extracted and discarded from the performance of duty, and when this is done, duty ceases to be irksome, and becomes joyous. Duty is only irksome to him who craves some enjoyment, or some selfish benefit for himself. Let the man who is vexed, on account of the vexation of his duty, look at himself, and he will find that his vexation proceeds, not from the duty itself, but from his selfish desire to escape from it. He who neglects duty, whether great or small, or of a public or private nature, neglects virtue. He who in his heart rebels against duty, rebels against virtue. When duty becomes an act of love, and each specific duty is performed with precision, fidelity, and detachment, much of the subtle selfishness of the heart is removed, and an important step is taken toward the heights of truth. The virtuous man concentrates his mind upon the perfect performance of his own duty, and does not interfere with the duty of another. The ninth step is the practice of unwavering righteousness, or moral integrity. This virtue must be firmly established in the mind, and so enter into every detail of a man's life. All dishonesty, deception, deceit and misrepresentation must be forever cast off, and the heart purged of every vestige of insincerity and deceit. The least deviation from the path of righteousness is a deviation from virtue. There should be no extravagance or exaggeration in words, but the pure truth should be spoken. To engage in deceit, no matter how apparently trifling, out of boastful pride, or in the hope of personal advantage, is a state of deceit, which one should strive to dispel. It is required of the man of virtue, that he should not only practice the most rigid honesty of thought, word, and deed, but be exact in his statements, without omitting or adding anything to the real truth. Conforming thus his mind to the principle of righteousness or moral integrity, he will gradually come to deal with persons and things in a just and impartial spirit. Considering equity before himself, and viewing all things with freedom from personal inclinations, passions and prejudices. When the virtue of righteousness is fully practiced and understood, so that all temptation of falsehood and insincerity has ceased, then the heart becomes purer and nobler. Then character is strengthened, and knowledge is enlarged, and life acquires a new meaning, and a new power. Thus the ninth step is accomplished. The 10th step is the practice of unlimited forgiveness. It consists in overcoming the feeling of injury, which arises from vanity, selfishness and pride, and in exercising selfless charity and generosity towards all. Rancor, retaliation and revenge are so ignoble, so vile, so petty and senseless, that they do not deserve the least attention. No one who fosters such conditions in his heart can rise above folly and suffering, and guide his life aright. Only by discarding them, and ceasing to be moved by them, can a man open his eyes to the true path of life. Only by developing an indulgent and charitable spirit, can he hope to approach, and perceive the strength and beauty, of a well-ordered life. In the heart of the strongly virtuous man, no feeling of personal injury can arise. He has renounced all retaliation, and has no enemies. If other men consider themselves his enemies, he will consider them kindly, understanding their ignorance, and taking full account of their ignorance. When this state of the heart is reached, then the 10th step in the discipline of selfish inclinations is accomplished. Then the third great lesson of virtue and knowledge is learned and mastered. Having set forth the first 10 steps and the 3 lessons of right action and right knowledge, I leave it to those of my readers who are ready for them to learn and master them in their daily lives. Undoubtedly, there is a higher discipline of the body, a deeper control of the tongue, as well as greater and more comprehensive virtues, to be acquired and understood, before the supreme state of bliss and wisdom can be attained. Although it is not my purpose to deal with them here. The lessons I have presented so far are only the first and simplest of the higher path. Once the reader has mastered them completely, he will experience a purification, strength and enlightenment so profound that he will not be left in the dark as to his future progress. Those of my readers, who have concluded these 3 lessons, will already have glimpsed, beyond and above, the lofty peaks of truth, as well as the narrow and steep path, which leads to them. At this point, you will have the choice to go forward. The straight path which I have traced, can be followed by all with the greatest profit to themselves, and to the world. And even those, who do not aspire to attain truth, will develop greater intellectual and moral strength, finer judgment, and deeper peace of mind, by perfecting themselves on this path. Nor will their material prosperity suffer by this change of heart, indeed, it will become truer, purer and more enduring. The man capable of success and fit for achievement is he who has left behind the petty weaknesses and daily vices of his species. He possesses the necessary fortitude, as to govern his body and mind, and pursues with resolution, the path of unwavering integrity, and pure virtue. Chapter 6. Mental Conditions and Their Effects. Without going into the details, of the great steps and lessons of right living, a task beyond the scope of this little work, it seems opportune to give some indications, on the mental conditions, from which life as a whole arises. These hints will be useful, for those who are ready and willing, to penetrate further into the inner realm, of heart and mind, where love, wisdom and peace await the rapidly progressing student of life. All sin is ignorance. It is a condition of darkness and underdevelopment. The evil thinker and the evildoer are in the same position in the school of life as the ignorant pupil in the school of learning. He has yet to learn to think and act correctly, that is, in accordance with the law. The pupil in learning is not happy, as long as he gets his lessons wrong. Likewise, one cannot escape from unhappiness, as long as sin remains undefeated. Life is a series of lessons. Some are diligent in learning them, and become pure, wise, and completely happy. Others are negligent, and never apply themselves. They remain impure, foolish and unhappy. Every form of unhappiness arises from a wrong mental condition. Happiness is inherent in right conditions of mind. Happiness is mental harmony, and unhappiness is mental inharmony. As long as a man lives in wrong mental conditions, he will live a wrong life, and suffer continuously. Suffering is rooted in error, and bliss is inherent in enlightenment. There is salvation for man only in the destruction of his own ignorance, error and self-deception. Where there are wrong conditions of mind, there is bondage and unrest. Where there are right conditions of mind, there is freedom and peace. Here are some of the main wrong mental conditions, and their disastrous effects on life. 1. Hatred, which leads to injury, violence, disaster and suffering. 2. Lust, which leads to confusion of intellect, remorse, shame and unhappiness. 3. Greed, which leads to fear, restlessness, unhappiness and loss. 4. Pride, which leads to disappointment, humiliation and lack of self-knowledge. 5. Vanity, which leads to anguish and mortification of the spirit. 6. Condemnation, which leads to persecution and hatred of others. 7. Ill will, leading to failures and problems. 8. Self-indulgence, which leads to misery, loss of judgment, rudeness, sickness and negligence. 9. Anger, leading to loss of power and influence. 10. Desire or slavery to self, which leads to sorrow, insanity, pain, uncertainty and loneliness. The above erroneous mental conditions are mere negations. They are states of darkness and deprivation, and not of positive power. Evil is not a power, it is ignorance and misuse of good. The hater is one who has failed to do the lesson of love correctly, and suffers accordingly. When he gets it right, the hatred will be gone, and he will see and understand the darkness and powerlessness of hatred. This is so with every wrong condition. The following are some of the most important right mental conditions and their beneficial effects on one's life. 1. Love, which leads to peaceful conditions, bliss and blessedness. 2. Purity, which leads to intellectual clarity, joy and invincible confidence. 3. Abnegation, leading to courage, contentment, happiness and abundance. 4. Humility, leading to calmness, restfulness, and knowledge of truth. 5. Meekness, leading to emotional balance, contentment in all circumstances. 6. Compassion, which leads to protection, love and reverence of others. 7. Goodwill, which leads to joy and success. 8. Self-control, leading to peace of mind, true judgment, refinement, health and honor. 9. Patience, leading to mental power, far-reaching influence. 10. Self-conquest, leading to enlightenment, wisdom, insight and deep peace. The above right conditions of mind are states of positive power, light, joyful possession and knowledge. The good man is wise. He has learned to do his lessons correctly, and therefore, he understands the exact proportions, which make up the sum of life. He is enlightened and knows right from wrong. He is supremely happy, doing only what is divinely right. The man who is enveloped in the wrong conditions of mind does not know. He is ignorant of good and evil, of himself, and of the internal causes which make his life. He is unhappy, and believes that others are the cause of his unhappiness. He works blindly and lives in darkness, seeing no central purpose in existence, no orderly and lawful sequence in the course of things. He who longs to attain the fullness of the higher life, he who sees with clarity the true order of things, and the meaning of existence, must detach himself from all wrong attitudes of heart and persevere untiringly in the practice of good. If he suffers or doubts, or is unhappy, let him search within himself, until he finds the cause, and having found it, let him discard it. Let him guard and purify his heart, in such a way, that every day less evil, and more good will come out of it. Thus he will become stronger, nobler, and wiser every day. He will increase his blessedness, and the light of truth, growing brighter and brighter within him, will dispel all darkness, and illuminate his path. Chapter 7. Exhortation. Disciples of truth, lovers of virtue, seekers of wisdom. You also, who know the emptiness of your own life, and long for a sublime and serenely joyous existence, take now in your hands the path of discipline. Enter the gate of discipline, and discover the better life. Abandon self-deception. Behold yourselves as you are, and see the way of virtue as it is. There is no sluggish path to truth. He who would be at the top of the mountain, must climb vigorously, and must rest only to regain strength. But if the climb is less glorious than the cloudless summit, it is still glorious. Discipline itself is beautiful, and the end result of discipline is sweet. Get up early and meditate. Begin each day with a conquered body, and a fortified mind, against error and weakness. Temptation will never be overcome by an unprepared struggle. The mind must be armed and prepared, in the silent hour. It must be trained to perceive, to know, and to understand. Sin and temptation disappear, when right understanding is developed. Right understanding is attained through unceasing discipline, and truth can only be attained through discipline. Patience will increase with effort and practice, and patience will make discipline beautiful. Discipline is irksome to the impatient and self-loving man, so he avoids it and continues to live loosely and confusedly. Discipline is not irksome to the lover of truth, and he will find infinite patience, that he can wait, work and overcome. As the gardener rejoices, as he sees the daily blossoming of his plants, so rejoices the disciplined man, as he witnesses the growth in his heart, of the divine flowers of purity, wisdom, compassion and love. The sluggish liver cannot escape sorrow and pain. The undisciplined mind falls, weak and helpless, before the fierce onslaught of passion. Mend thy mind well, then, lover of truth. Be vigilant, thoughtful, and resolute. Your salvation is at hand, your willingness and effort are all that is needed. If you fail 10 times, be not discouraged. If you fail 100 times, get up and go on your way. If you fail 1,000 times, do not despair. When you enter the right path, success is certain, if you do not completely abandon the path. First the struggle, and then the victory. First work, then rest. First weakness, then strength. At first the lower life, the glare and confusion of battle, and at the end the beautiful life, the silence and peace. All common things, the events of every day, which with the hour begin and end. Our pleasures and our discontents, are rounds by which we can ascend. We have no wings, we cannot fly, but we have feet to climb and climb.